Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Marcia Dyson is back in the house. Always
I'm
a
glad
pleasure.
to be back.
One of my favorites, and of course, Bruce Fein. I want to read some interesting stats. You'll see it on the screen, but I want to read it from my iPhone. It's called Health. It's put out by CNN, and it's called Firearm Homicide Death Rates by Race. Annual firearm homicide deaths among men per 100,000 per year by race and state. Missouri, white, 2.77, black, 59.42, difference, 56.65. Michigan, white, 1.52, black, 49%. Illinois, 1%, black, 47%. Indiana, 2%, 46% black. Pennsylvania, 1.47%, 43% black. Nebraska, 1.39%, 40% black. Louisiana, 4%, 42% black. Ohio, 1%, 37% black. Wisconsin, 0.92%, 33% black. New Jersey, 0.65%, 31% black. New Jersey, 0.6%, 31% black. Oklahoma, 4%, 34% black. That's 4% white, by the way. California, 2%, 32% black. Tennessee, 3% white, 33% black. Maryland, in my backyard, 1% white, 31% black. Arkansas, 4% white, 33% black. Delaware, 1% white, 30% black. Alabama, 4% white, 33% black. The United States, 2.10% white, 29% black. There is no question when you think about what happened recently in Washington, D.C., where 3 cops were shot. And then in Kansas City during the parade, I mean, I was at the Super Bowl. I was so happy for Kansas City. And I've been at the Nationals parade, the Mystics parade. And I get excited and I want to be there. The last thing, if you're taking your kids and your grandkids, the last thing you're going to think about is somebody's going to start shooting you. 22 people dead. But guess what? They're all black. Which fits into this statistic. Nobody wants to talk about it. Disproportionately, young black men not only killing each other, they're killing other people. Is it the breakdown in the family? Is it fatherless households? It's not because they're black. People don't innately kill because they're black. But I've got to ask the question nobody wants to talk about. What is happening to black men disproportionately? And they're more dangerous than any terrorist organization, if you ask me, in these inner cities. What is happening here, Marcia?
Well, first of all, when you have access to something, whether it's good or bad, you use it. There was a hip hop artist, and I can't remember, but he had a line that says, "We don't have no planes, we don't have no boats, we don't ship dope to coast," right? So he was talking about the infiltration of drugs in the black community by design. And the same thing about the guns. The guns are infiltrated the black community by design to young people who are hopeless. And they're hopeless not because they don't have an anticipation of tomorrow, but when you go to a school that is anti-scholarship, that you are on a drug because the drug companies have come into the school to augment a decrease in the education system. So every other child is now labeled attention deficit disorder, and which I brought attention to Congress people in a conversation about gun laws that says it may have as a side effect homicidal and suicidal tendencies. That's a lethal cocktail. You have guns, you have a sense of hopelessness, you have lethargy, and no matter what, even though we can celebrate, 50 years of hip hop, there's no hip hop in the black community. And it pains me as a social justice activist with the United Justice Coalition, which I do bring to their attention. We have to put our children, in fact, in check. So look at my hometown, Chicago. You had a mayor.
I didn't mention Chicago.
Oh, no, but you should have mentioned Chicago.
Yeah,
People ask me when I go to the Middle East, I'm not afraid. I said, hold up. I come from this wild, wild Midwest. I'm more afraid when I go home because you can't even take a child to McDonald's without getting shot. So I'm not going to put it into the hands of the youth. And I'm not going to say that they don't have agency, because we are in modern day. It's not like that. But you do use what is available to you to respond to the angst in your life.
Let me ask you a question. Why is it, well, then, if that's the case, why is this, and then it has ever happened to your children in your generation?
Well, because first of all, my son and grandsons moved out the country because of stuff like this, and they wanted to not only safeguard them, but so they could be global citizens.
But it nothing happened to them while they were in the country.
No, they didn't. But
why?
Well, because it's not only just where they live, and I'm not saying that they wouldn't have that incident, because we lived in the ghetto. We started there, right? It's the way, right? I brought them up that way. But you can't say if you go into the gas station, it's indiscriminate for a shooter who has this thing in his heart to kill somebody, whether they're on drugs or not.
But your kids are not shooting anybody.
No, they're not shooting because they don't have guns.
No.
I wouldn't allow my children to have guns.
Is the issue guns?
The issue is not guns, because back in the day, before there was guns in the hood, you knifed somebody to death, right? So it's not about that. It's an intent of the heart. It's a burden. When people, I don't know where they get the inflation, it's great. But when you live at a certain level, we forget that 40 million people live below the line of poverty. And I bet the majority of them are Black people or people of color.
Wait a minute.
No, so wait,
Okay.
but you asked me a question,
Okay,
right?
okay.
And I would not give an excuse for the intent of the heart. But also, they don't have any contra.
I'm not taking away anything that
Yeah.
you're saying. What my problem is what you're not saying.
Okay, but wait a minute.
What is it you're not saying, though?
Well, what I also want to say, too, is that, and I challenge the Black church,
Okay.
because we have to have social agency. One thing that Martin Luther King Jr. said, that he was afraid that we were going to integrate ourselves out of power. For me, that was moral power and financial power, right?
You don't like this topic, do you?
I do. No, you hit a chord. I do like it because I have to reconcile myself. I talked to my young activists who wanted to act like it was a police problem only in the hood. I said, no, we need to do something about it. In 1985, with Ed Gardner, who owned the Soft Sheen products, he had a black on black love. So we saw the infiltration of drugs and the formation of gangs. So we try to use a via positiva to put that in check, right? So I knew it was a problem then. And so as my social activism is to talk to the mayors, talk to the social agencies, talk to the churches. The churches, your sanctuary is big, but where's the social center that these kids can have a sanctuary? When I came back from Haiti and I was in Cité Soleil, people were saying that was a dangerous place, but what's happening to the children here? So I went over to Cora Berry Center and talked to young youth, and it broke my heart. The cameraman actually cried because the kids were saying things like, one young man, to the extreme, said that he dressed up like he was in the Nation of Islam. And I said, that's kind of extreme. I guess it wasn't Halloween. He said, no, because there was respect for the Nation of Islam in the neighborhood, so he could walk safely through the corridors of his neighborhood. But he said, I said something and my response wasn't right. I said, was assalamu alaikum. He said, yeah, I did not know the response and I got beaten up. And there was a young girl there with the big hoops and the nail polish that some people might vilify, saying, oh, look at, she's trashy. But these kids want a sanctuary, and it's important that our community give them that sanctuary, because even in the household, if it's not done, you come from the South, and you know what a real community was.
Yeah, you
right?
get your butt whipped.
Right, so I'm gonna leave it
there.
There
was accountability
so I do
and
like the
responsibility, and there's
subject, and
certain
we
things
do
that
have
you
it.
could not do.
Right.
Let me get Bruce in on this
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah, I get my butt whipped.
No, I think
I was too afraid of my parents.
Right,
And I had
and
a
the
father
neighbor.
in the household
And the neighbor.
that do certain things, okay?
Absolutely.
But it's not
I
the
think-
parents. The parents want to discipline the
Right.
kids, but the law won't allow it.
Yeah.
In New York, you can't even talk back to your parents, because if
Right.
you talk back to them, you could be locked up.
That's
But Bruce,
true. Okay.
Well, I think that without disputing anything you said, I think, and maybe it's not quite the elephant in the living room, is the family. Family item and family raising doesn't cost any money. It just means the
Oh, it
discipline.
costs money now.
And no, I mean,
it costs
no,
money.
I'm just
That's
saying,
true.
in order for a parent to tell a child, you don't do these things.
Amen.
These are the 10 Commandments. It doesn't cost anything. It is very simple, and you make it clear that they are human beings. They respect everybody, and they obviously have the right to self-defense. But this is about seeking justice, controlling your emotions, and being industrious, irrespective of what other people are doing. Daniel Moynihan, when he was in the White House, he identified the problem with the
remember.
breakup of the black family. He says it's more broken today than it was during slavery.
By design, though,
But,
too.
okay, well, for whatever reason.
whatever reason.
But you can always, there's a famous saying by Justice Louis Brandeis, you resist the irresistible by resisting, right? So you just resist.
You
Now,
can't,
it takes some resistance and strength, but that's how you have to encourage and you develop your ability to have character. It's not easy, but that's why it's virtuous. If it was easy and pushing water downhill, we wouldn't have this conversation,
Yes, it's
right?
true.
And it's not as though we ignore the items that you've identified, that the family starts everywhere because every child needs, they're looking for emotional, psychological support.
True.
Children want to get the approval of their parents. That's just an instinct. Parents, in my judgment, by and large, are not stepping up to their responsibility. They need to be the ones that says, no, you're going to be penalized if you do X, Y, Z. And they need to be involved in their kids' lives, go to the PTA meetings and things of that sort. Now, it's not a panacea because there are other environmental factors that influence things. But without the parental anchor, it's going to persist. And that's why it's persisted. And Moynihan spoke about this 40 years ago.
I want to stay with this. Okay. Also, the legislature are allowing laws to focus not on behavior, but on race, because they felt the pendulum swung so far the other way that so many people were incarcerated that should not be there, so they tried to correct this. But when you have 90% of the crimes being committed by 10% of the people, especially young people, you have to realize at some point that everybody cannot be rehabilitated. Sometimes these kids understand the laws and the rules better than we do. They know how to work around the laws, and they know if they're locked up before they're 18, they'll be back out on the streets. That's just the way it works. At some point, law enforcement has to look into this and say, law enforcement is responsible for this. The legislature is responsible for this. And there are parents, I've seen this in Baltimore, where parents have gone to law enforcement begging them to lock up their son because they realize that not only is their son a danger, but he's also a threat to their household. Parents, because they realize they cannot raise the kids anymore, because you're right, fathers are not there. So there's so many hands that are involved in this strategy to correct the situation. But at some point, you've got to send the message. Like my parents said, if you do that, I'm gonna whip you until you bleed. Now that would be child abuse today, but look at how we turn out.
No, but the challenge is this, Armstrong, and again, not disputing anything you've said. It is certainly true, and it's been true for a long time, a very small percentage of all the criminals commit a huge proportion of all crime. I mean, hundreds of crimes. But the difficulty is, as human beings, we really don't have much of a clue as identifying who falls into that category. So you end up, if you say, well, we're really going to have very long sentences to keep the few who commit hundreds of crimes in prison, you're going to keep people in prison who don't need that long sentence. That's just the nature of the problem. It's very, very challenging. We don't know. We can't say, well, that one's going to commit 500 crimes if we let him go. We don't have that knowledge or insight into human nature to be able to do that. And that, as I say, that's the struggle.
We can only judge it by their repeat behavior.
I know, but it does.
I mean, look at recidivism. It's almost 60% now.
No, I know, but we don't know that in advance which are the ones that are going to do it.
When we do know is what I'm speaking of. We should do something about it.
Absolutely true.
I'm Armstrong Williams, Marcia, Bruce, and I. We'll be back. Don't go away.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the broadcast. I want to get into the perspectives on Gaza and Israel. And it seems to continue to divide not only this country, but around the world. You know, the Palestinians and a lot of the Arabs believe, because I've seen all the protests against President Biden, where they believe, well, Hamas started this on October 7th, and so whatever follows, they deserve. Because Israel did not ask for this. If they massacre them, if they annihilate them, if they exterminate them for the planet, so be it. It all happened because of October 7th. And not once has Hamas says, I'm sorry, I apologize, I did something wrong, it won't happen again. What Hamas is saying, given the opportunity, we will continue and complete what we've started. So how do you reconcile Netanyahu's, and I mean, this what they've called the destruction, the infrastructure destruction, the food shortage. I mean, they have all kind of issues. It's just it's Death Valley.
Yeah, it is, Armstrong, but I think it may be a little bit incomplete to just focus on October 7th, because this problem has been festering literally for hundreds of years, certainly at least back to 1948. There wasn't any UN resolution saying that there was partition. It was a recommendation that was never acted upon. The country immediately broke out into war. And after the British mandate, which was very cynical, and the British were sometimes permitting Jews to emigrate, sometimes not. And this is David Ben-Gurion made this statement. He's the first Israeli prime minister. He's like the George Washington of Israel. He said, well, listen, we're going to have a problem. The Arabs think that we stole their land. And we did, because all the horrors that happened to us, the Holocaust, the Arabs didn't do that. This was Europeans, the Kristallnacht. And of course, we believe our God gave us this land, but they don't believe in our God. So there's going to be a problem because they're going to think we stole the land. And that's his candor. The problem is it is very, very complex because there's nothing in the sky. There's nothing in the law that ordains this is where Israel is, this is where Palestine is, or otherwise. I mean, Palestine was under Ottoman rule for centuries. Who drew the boundaries? The people who had the guns. No morality to it whatsoever. And if we look at October 7th, it's the midst of a very long period, at least since 1967, where there's been no Palestinian state. Israel occupies, with military rule, Gaza, the West Bank. I'm not saying the Palestinians have their problems too. You know, they kill people who talk to Israelis.
Muslims kill more Muslims than anybody else.
Yeah, Muslims kill more Muslims than they kill Jews and Christians. Absolutely.
Jews kill more Jews.
Yeah.
You know, it's a thing.
I agree with that. That's it. It shows why it's a mess, but it's not a simple answer. And when he asked, well, yeah, the Palestinians say we need a two-state solution. That's the position of the United States. And Netanyahu says, no, never is there ever going to be a two-state solution. And you have campaigns in Israel to say, you know what, we ought to go back and annex the West Bank and Gaza. They may or may not. I'm not saying that that's what we did in the United States with the American Indians, with Mexico. Countries do this. But it's a huge problem. Everything Israel has done, we've done
It's what
before.
the French has done,
Yeah,
the British have done.
The British, absolutely.
But first of all, we're saying Israel and the conflict in October the 7th. The big elephant in the room is our country, right? So they couldn't do anything unless we fueled it by allowing these weapons in. And it's before October the 7th, as you correctly said. I remember that Dr. Martin Luther King was labeled a terrorist. I was at the Congressional Country Club and watching that Herbert Hoover was the first president.
Yesterday's heroes and today's rebels.
That's right. Okay. So why was he labeled a terrorist? Because he had the audacity to speak up for the voiceless Negroes of that particular time and led a march, which would be similar to the Palestinians or Gazans wanted to maintain a march within this land. And I was an ordained minister, but I don't believe the Bible is a recorder of deeds for real estate. Yeah. Okay, that's first and foremost. And we have to remember, before we got into the mix, Jews, Christians, and Arabs lived there peacefully. And then we get confused that there are Black Jews, there are Christian Arabs, right? So there was a mix, and it was a whole beautiful situation. It's just that through the British Accord, you're going to give somebody their land. We have to remember that America...
They had no regard for the conflict in the future.
But
no
you
way.
have to remember
None. They just decamped and said,
so,
Pontius Pilate, here, your problem.
It's the same thing with the set. We love the story of the Pilgrims coming on the Plymouth. They were settlers, just like the Israelis are settlers on this land. When you look at what happened even in South Africa with apartheid, and as an African American, do African American history, which really bothers me with the people who talk about race as a social construct, that we cannot see the commonality of pain with people who look like us, which are multi-ethnic within their own groups and tribes, who are multi-pigmentation. But for me, it's the lack of the sensibility of the pain and humanity. What is happening in Gaza is pure out genocide. And we are implicit in that. You know, when you are in court, I didn't touch the gun, but I gave the guy the gun. I knew the gun was there. That makes me a what? Accomplice. And we are accomplice. BB couldn't shoot his BB bombs unless we did it. We are fighting the war. And then to their intent, they already have the blueprint of how they're going to make this the new Riviera. Right? And then with the land grab, because they want to push through, not use the Suez Canal, but they're always talking about, now the plan is to barge toward within where Gaza exists so that they can bypass Ethiopia and Yemen, as all those other countries that are doing what we are not doing, the most humanitarian image of saving people's lives. The Red Cross can even come in to exit some young children who finally got to Egypt and to fly. You know how I know? Because I led the campaign begging black churches, please do what the Red Cross refuses to do. And that is not what the image of America is. So they refused for me. It took us 400 years, centuries, decades, and even now still fighting for our rights as African Americans. I look at the Palestinians and say, like, we don't have 4 centuries for this fight. And not only that, the innocent people aren't fighting. They are sitting ducks. They increase my faith, regardless of my faith, that they would die because they have no place to go.
Well,
They're
why
asking
would
for help.
the Arab countries take them? And why is Saudi Arabia...
But why take them where?
Let me finish. Let me finish. And why is Saudi Arabia now trying to build a military alliance with the United States to protect them? They're willing to recognize Israel, and they're willing to rebuild Gaza because they believe Hamas and Iran is a much bigger threat than anything else to them in that region.
Yeah, the reason, well, not Iran, but they don't want...
Iran.
They do not want a democratic Palestinian state because they're all tyrants. They figure the last thing we want is a thriving democracy in Palestine. It would cast aspersion on our own tyrannies because there's no democracy in Saudi Arabia for sure, or Bahrain, or UAE, or any of these Arab countries. But I'm not trying to defend any of these countries. They all have ulterior motives. They all have their own interests at heart. The Palestinians are playthings to them. But go back to the Pope, he said after October 7th, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Nothing that we say here today is to exculpate the Hamas atrocities. They should be tried, they should be convicted, they should be punished. But to have those trials doesn't mean that you have a free fire zone for innocent people. I have seen on TV babies in incubators perish. Babies in incubators. They didn't have any electricity. They wiped out everything. You can't tell me a baby in an incubator is a secret Hamas. Okay? So there's this idea of using a scalpel instead of a blunderbuss. That's a joke. It's like saying we used a scalpel at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Really? All the people go up, in radioactivity. It's a very, very difficult problem. That's why, in my view, I'm not trying to cast blame or aspersion on one or the other. It's a huge, huge problem. There's blame to go about on both sides, that we need goodwill and at least try to make sure we target the people who are doing evil with evil, but try to minimize the tragedies.
So you believe both are God's chosen people?
I believe what?
I think we're all God's people.
No, I think all human beings are born with the same DNA.
Yes,
okay?
I agree with that.
That's where it is. And that's the problem we have, Armstrong, is that everybody wants to be the chosen people. Or you got to talk to God.
I feel I'm chosen.
Yeah,
I'm chosen.
Everybody does, right? Yeah, right. Yeah.
Look, I don't want my real estate on Park Avenue. You think I can go and get it? I'm chosen for that, all right?
Yeah.
But I think they take it to a new science.
No, you know what? We are the pot calling the kettle black. It's like we're between the Super Bowl and we'll be approaching on the NBA. Militarism is the most brutal sport in the world. And there are sides that will be taken. So, of course, when you look at the region, imagine when the most powerful military countries is the United States. You talk about the Middle East, and you want to invoke the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait, or Yemen, or whatever. But forget, you have to also survive yourself. You think that Saudi or all those Gulf countries could fight against, if they collaborated against the militarism of the United States of America, which is fooling BB's war? They could not. No. So some of it is not so much that they're tyrants, it's also self-survival. But I'm hoping that they do step up, like the president of Jordan did with President Biden, and some things that
let me ask you this.
He's probably on the CIA payroll. He's not going to step up. King Abdullah, like King Hussein. He's on CIA payroll.
What about Hamas?
Yeah.
But what? Let me.
What about Hamas?
I traveled throughout the Middle East, and I was in the refugee camps.
They're savages.
No, stop.
They're brutal.
Let me tell you something.
Tell me something.
I'm going to tell you something.
Tell me something.
In my travels to the Middle East, I went to the refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan. I was on the border of Syria and Lebanon in the occupied territory during the conflict. I'm in the country of Haiti for 7 years, right? It took me going to the Middle East and seeing what was going on in my children in Chicago. When you see these children whose lives are like a white landscape with nothing on it, no gaiety, no sense of the age of innocence for children, it broke my heart. I went back and told the Secretary of the State at that time, I said, you would have me think that terrorists are grown men with assault weapons. I know now what it is to create a terrorist. It is that children without an age of happiness, a sense of innocence. When some of the bombers, say for the Chibok and the Boko Haram in Africa and Kenya, they could tell children who did not have the reality of the sense of childhood that you put this bomb on you, go into the village, meet your mother, she's there to give you candy, and those kids would go. I said, it break my heart. My grandchildren would say, Mama Sia, why do you go all over the world to do what you want to do? I said, because the childhood innocence and happiness of that child over there will impact your childhood, because they will grow up to be the terrorists, because we create these monsters, right? We do. In a form of fashion, regardless of their religion, regardless of ethnicity. So that's how I translate that experience in the Middle East. When I look at Chicago, the reason why out of responsibility, I went to the mayor at that time. You go to the educators, you do go to the parents, but remember, people are acting like happy times again.
You're saying that Hamas.
I'm not saying Hamas.
People.
No, but Hamas, that terror is grown in you. That you are. Look at the toy soldiers. That story about the toy soldiers. And when these kids, like the kids in Congo, you're beaten into the servitude, and you're angry, and they too are illiterate.
Are you saying they become Hamas?
I'm not saying, but the tendency, and if you're paid for it, when you think that your life is nothing, the same thing we think of our young people now who are great artists, but they co-opt their integrity and their morality, and they end up morphing to something when they sign a big contract, because the person owning that contract says, we don't want that positive stuff, only give us the funky, nasty stuff.
Like the
right?
rap artists.
Well, some of the rap artists, not all of them, some of them are good, but I do debate the lyricism.
The B word.
The lyricism
and
the
crime, the drugs,
absolutely.
the guns.
And sometimes, and I do concern that, because also we're talking about a spirituality, and we don't remember that hip hop, for me, in the musical terms, is a cacophony. It's a cacophony. And we forget the lyricism and the music of hope. And I'm not saying you have to be old school, because I know hip hop and R&B and jazz, but we have to take all these cultural factors and political
Marcia's
factors.
on fire today. I got to take a break.
Okay.
Marcia's on fire today.
Okay, you started it.
We'll be back. No. We'll be back. We'll be back. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com.
You know, the biggest decision that Joe Biden has to make is not immigration. It's not Ukraine and Israel. But I think his biggest decision in this presidential campaign is who will be his running mate. People assume that it's going to be Vice President Kamala Harris, but I don't know about that, because the president continues to deteriorate mentally and physically by the day. And there's a lot that's going on in the White House, and I'm not so sure whether Kamala Harris will be his running mate. And on top of that, and I know people think that the vice president is consumed with racism and transgenderism, but we do know that when you're in the role of the White House, a former vice president himself said, it was either under Truman or Roosevelt, he said being the vice president is no more than like being a bucket of spit. That's what he said, like a bucket of spit. being the vice president. And we know that this woman is well qualified, former attorney general, U.S. senator, acquitted herself, was phenomenal during the debates, whether you agree with it or not. But somehow or another, when she became vice president, they reduced her to saying, well, you're going to handle immigration, knowing it would set her up for failure. As if they set her up to marginalize her, so her ego can never compete with that of the president of the United States. So the question that I ask this panel, what about the fact that when you talk about Biden's decline, nobody is mentioning whether his vice president, Bruce, can step up to the plate?
I think that Biden does not, and his entourage does not want to raise that issue because it underscores Biden's frailty. As soon as you ask about the vice president, then it says, oh, why are you concerned? Because if you're certain that you can serve another 4 years, the vice president is just wallpaper, right? They attend funerals and hand out blankets at earthquakes. And the reason why there's this dilemma that I think Biden confronts is that the more he would go out of his way to give Kamala Harris prominence and say, and make it clear to the American voters, yes, she's competent to step into my shoes if I have to surrender because of mental frailty or otherwise, the more it's going to call attention in November. Do I really want to go into that voting box and vote for somebody who probably is not going to be compos mentos for another 4 years? And I can guarantee you the people around Biden who just want to make sure he's there because they are in the White House and think that they can capitalize on their access to the president, they don't want to see Kamala Harris within 5,000 miles. They want to make sure, even if Biden is just a robot, if he's a mummy, they want their power. And they're like a Praetorian guard around him. And you just can't get through. And that's why, in my view, although it doesn't make all that much sense to me for Biden himself, they're going to try to continue to suppress this idea that, hey, she's really a good vice president, so if Biden happens to stand aside, she can step in without breaking stride. They don't even want to get that in the dialogue, because then people start thinking, okay, now I remember. Yeah, Biden couldn't remember when his son died. Biden couldn't remember the president of Egypt from the president of Mexico, the prime minister of Germany from somebody else. He's got very dim memory. He makes mistakes all the time. And again, he looks, when he speaks, he almost looks like a robot.
No,
It's
mummified.
Mummified, yeah.
Yes.
He's halfway in his coffin. And so
he's not going to make it in the second term.
There's no way.
He's not gonna make it.
Another 4 years, there is no way
And
this guy
Marcia,
can
it just stuns me that no one talks about Kamala.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, for the African American community, we were responsible for putting her in place, even though
You think so?
No, because of her record with the law enforcement, which was antithetical to our social justice movement, because we are in so desperation of representation, which to me does not necessarily equate to liberation, to have someone to look like us in the White House.
Is she ready to be president?
Well, you know what president really is, because we assume, and you know better, and I surely know that you do, we act like the president rules the country. That is the greatest misnomer that there ever is. First of all,
Trump ran the country. I did.
Well, because
he must have been the exception.
Well, because he realized what this country is, a confederate corporation, a constitutional structure, basically. So, you know, you can, whoever writes the checks, right? We know that the lobbyists and corporations have a big hand in the puppet.
Talk to me about Kamala. I want to hear you talk about
Kamala.
Because it seems like you're not talking about Kamala.
Well, I wouldn't sort of debate her aptitude, because when you're
I already said she has that.
Well, yes. So I'm saying that she would be. I think that she would be ready to be president, but are the people really ready to have her?
In the White House, not
in the White House.
Republicans.
No,
in the White House.
In the White
Okay.
House. Well, I'm talking about the White House.
Okay.
And the question is not whether they're ready to have a black woman as president, and not so much would they have any woman ready to be president. I think that the people are asking for something more full. I think that she would have a chance, but now people, I'm going to the DNC in my hometown, Chicago. I'm hoping it's like 1960. I'm ready for some disruption.
This is a different Marcia from the first two segments.
Right?
I mean, you're hesitant.
No,
here.
no, I'm not. I'm just saying. So people are talking about Michelle Obama.
But we're not talking about Michelle
But
Obama. We're talking about Kamala Harris. Let's talk about Kamala.
The vice president, because she's had her tutelage in the White House and she knows things that we don't know, she is ready. The question is, will the party let her step up? She would definitely be ready, because she has more insight than any of us talking on this talk show. She's behind the scenes with the Wizard of Oz, looking behind the curtain. She knows who the players are. And I'm hoping that she has been studious. And I'm hoping that the people in the West Wing at the Pentagon are pumping up in the likely event that this president will not make it even to the primary.
Don't you know if any other president was having the mental deterioration like that Biden is having. It's sad, by the way. It's sad.
It's very
And listen,
sad to
let me just
watch.
say this to you. He's not going to get any better.
Why no?
No, no, yeah.
We all know. He's
Unfortunately.
not getting any better. Don't you know that the focus would be immediately by the mainstream media and the White House and everybody else on the vice president?
Well, not in the crisis that we spoke about earlier. Remember, there's a lot.
Why is there focus on the vice president right now? Why?
Well, because you have to make sure that the image of the president who is allowing certain things to go on, which money is tied to, war is a big money maker, and people who have that interest, it really does impact. You don't want that person out. They know that any president will acquiesce to their duties within the United States. But there's something so special about this Biden administration that we're going to have to wait and look until after he's out of office, whether he's reelected or not, to
Marcia,
really look at it.
the vice president's
indiscriminately.
approval ratings are lower than his.
Well, then why you asking me this
Yeah.
question?
And I want to
You know?
interject. If I could interject, yeah, okay.
I mean,
Listen,
really,
the idea.
I'm trying,
No.
I'm trying to pump up the sister.
No, no.
I hear you telling me her numbers are
No,
low.
no.
I believe
But
that
they
one-
are.
Yeah.
They are low. But
Yeah.
you have to ask you shouldn't be asking me why, and you know the answer about low
Because the
numbers.
White House allows it.
But not only
they
that.
put out the press and a narrative on her.
Yeah, yeah.
They can
Well-
put her in a position of power to show her strength.
You're not looking at Instagram too on the young people,
No.
because young people, somebody questioned, I think was a View, and I don't know which one of the panelists on the View asked her about the deterioration of young people's disenchantment with the president, therefore her, but with this administration. So right now she has the unfortunate of being clustered with her.
They're one and the same.
One and the same.
Go
No,
ahead.
no, no.
Bruce.
Well, first of all,
Somewhat.
when Biden handed the baton on immigration to her, okay, hey, you're handing an anchor to somebody and say, hey, don't sink in the ocean, right?
Yes.
Because this is a problem. I've been around a long time. It's been here for 50 years. There's nobody going to be able to solve that. The second thing is, it's not true that vice presidents know what's going on in the White House. Harry Truman didn't even know there was an atomic bomb
well,
when he's
there it
7.
is.
And read Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was so far out of the
You're
White
scaring me
House.
then. So you tell me she doesn't know?
No, no, absolutely
So
she
I
does
don't
not.
want her to
No,
know.
I know, but
no
so
way.
that makes me scared. So, okay.
Let Bruce continue.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
they don't want her
yeah,
to know
yeah, I know.
intentionally.
Yeah,
Okay.
intentionally. And you read Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
know,
the
I
Kennedys
know,
didn't
I know,
let him
I
get
know.
within 50 miles of the White
I
House.
remember when
You
the
know,
Pentagon didn't tell the White House stuff.
Yeah,
so,
okay,
yeah,
so
you're right.
so it's not just proximity doesn't necessarily mean
That's
they
right.
know anything. And I do think that it's very, very clear that the Biden people, whether they're right or wrong, they want to minimize Kamala Harris' profile so that no one suspects that they should be concerned that Biden may not survive a second term and she'll step in. They want the illusion can persist that Biden's compos mentis. Look at the hysteria that greeted the special counsel report, Mr. Hers, about, well, he's kind of an old man and he couldn't remember. I mean, what was new about
didn't
that?
remember he's
What was new?
vice president.
Yeah.
So if he didn't remember the vice president, he can't possibly think of the classified
Yeah,
documents because it happened
so
during
let me say this. So in the height of Black History Month, I'm offended that if you choose a Black woman to be the vice president only to closet her, then you were pimping the Black
They
vote.
do that with any vice president.
I don't
Marcia, that's
care.
not doing no
I'm just
raise.
saying that.
Oh, come
I'm
on.
using this Black History
Come on.
Month
That's
to
not
say
doing no
that.
raise. You're
Okay.
stretching right now.
No.
Please, they do that all the time.
I'm going. This was hysteria. What about this? He said he basically was a child who said the emperor's got no clothes.
Yeah,
he doesn't know when he was vice president. He doesn't know who he's talking to
Or when his
abroad.
son
He
fortunately
mixes
passed.
he
I
mixes
know.
up presidents from one as opposed to another shortly after he speaks to them. It was obvious, and the reason why they were hysterical was because what he said was true. If it
Okay.
wasn't true, they wouldn't have said anything.
Let's ask our host, do you think that Kamala Harris would make a great president?
The voters must decide that.
Oh, see, there you go.
Yeah, voters
All
must
right, so
decide
I'm going
that.
to calm down. The voters will
But the
decide.
voters must make that
They must
decision.
decide.
Yes.
Yeah.
But,
truth.
but listen, I want to mention this to you. We have 2 minutes, and then Victoria is going to join us. I'm going to give Bruce a break, and I'm just talk to my distinguished women today.
So you can
But I
beat
want
me
you to
up
stick
more?
around. No. We have some other things that I want to talk about. You know, there is this possibility that Donald Trump could be president again. But I don't believe the mainstream media is telling the truth about his poll numbers, his popularity, that he's leading Biden. I think they believe They want him to be the nominee because they want the Democrats to continue another 4 years. I just don't believe the poll numbers, and I don't believe all the hype. And listen, look at what happened in New York recently when Marcia lost. Just about every candidate that Donald Trump has ever endorsed over the last several years have all lost, including Donald Trump himself in the last election.
And remember the polls in 2016?
Yes.
This was Thomas Dewey wins over Truman, right? The polls can get it wrong all the time. They have ulterior motives out there. So I don't believe the polls either. He obviously has his base. But I don't think the American people yet really are comfortable with politics of name-calling, contempt for the law, calling everybody under the sun corrupt and a witch hunt no matter what the law and the evidence is. There's some that don't mind that.
But one thing we learned from Sousa in his re-election in New York is that he didn't want Biden's endorsement.
Yeah, no.
He was strong on immigration. He moved towards the center because what he was saying to us and what the voters were saying, we don't want the extreme right
or the left.
Or the extreme left.
Correct.
We want people to lead us and not divide us. We want who's going to put Americans always and first. And if you're that candidate, that's who we're voting for. Americans are caring less and less about labor. So look at Robert Kennedy Jr., which is why he's doing so well, because America's, the middle wants reason, not something that's going to continue to sink America, make us a dark place on that hill where you can no longer see the light. And I think that's a lesson that everybody can learn from that recent election to replace George Santos' seat in New York. Marcia and I will be back with Victoria. I'm Bruce. We're going to say goodbye to you. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
And welcome back. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Now, the second stanza, people take issue with. They think that Francis Scott Key may have been making racist overtures. I'll let you hear it for yourself. On the shore, dimly seen through the mist of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes. What is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines in the stream. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, oh long may it wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And then this, and where is that band who so vauntedly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hurling enslaved from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. There's one thing other than sports that unify Americans. It is our star-spangled banner. It's not a white national anthem. It's not a black national anthem. It's not a race national anthem. It is our national anthem. I was recently at the Super Bowl and heard Audrey Day saying, "Lift every voice and sing," what some people say is the Negro national anthem. I love the Negro national anthem. I learned it. I grew up with it as a kid. But there's a time and place for everything. And my position has been, while there's a place for the Negro national anthem, is that what you want to call it, at this event where Americans should be under one umbrella, that is not the place for it. Your thoughts, Victoria?
Well, I definitely agree with you. I think that the national anthem covers all Americans, and I watched the Super Bowl, not in person like you, but I also think that, you know, there was only one national anthem that brought players to tears, and it was the U.S. national anthem.
Marcia?
What year was that written?
But a lot has changed.
Okay, no, but because
we're a different country, and we're different laws
right,
today.
but what I'm saying is,
Yes.
when you ask, was it
For today, where
for
we
today,
are. Yeah.
right? But you remember that when it was written, if it was written anytime post and pre or during slavery, then we were 3/5 human, so it didn't kind of like demand that.
Yeah, I get that.
Okay, so we're far now.
Yeah.
So it is a national anthem. It is a national anthem, whether we like it or not, and whether we should sing it as African Americans or stand up or whatever the protests, the artists, the entertainers who are influencers could talk about that and some things that they should and they don't, is to me is an individual choice, like your religion, based upon your experience with your country. And so I leave it to them to decide whether or not they feel that they should recognize.
It's not them, it's the NFL.
Or the NFL. Well, the NFL, right, which is
The NFL.
right, to have it that way with the kneeling of the knee. So they chastise the person who, like Kaepernick, who decides to.
But don't you
to
want us
kneel.
unified, though?
I do want us unified.
Everybody knows that
Well, you
song.
know what? Just like there are amendments to our Constitution, maybe we should come up in this day and age with a contest. Somebody, please write a more unifying national anthem
We have
for the
it,
day.
the Star Spangled Banner. It is unified, and that is the unified.
Okay,
Yes,
you know,
we do
you
have it.
think so? It's obviously
I
it's
think
not.
most Americans would overwhelmingly agree, but we've
I'm
discussed
not saying
it.
we could not, but
I
you
think-
asking, but I'm saying we need a contest. I
That
just
is
wanna
my
be-
anthem, and that is my America. But,
Okay,
but I
it's my
wanna-
America too.
Yes, and that's why you wear red,
That's
and I wear
right.
blue and white. Red, white, and blue. That's America.
Mine is for the blood.
And mine is for the blood of all of us who died
That's
to make
right.
that country for what it
Me
is
too.
today. And that's what unifies us.
Right.
All of us have a past. Jews, blacks, white, everybody
Well, I'm
has a
gonna add
past. The
another
Native
stanza
Americans,
to it.
the
I'm
Native Americans, the Native Americans. We all have a past. But today we should be unified with that anthem, and it should unify us, and no one
Right.
should use it to
Well,
divide.
some people may have historical amnesia about the Native Americans. You know, they probably have.
But
a
I don't.
too.
That's why
But
I
you know,
mentioned.
so maybe we should just add another stanza like the.
No, we don't need to edit it. We'll keep it the way it is. But
Okay.
we'll keep it the way. But I want to
Okay.
move to this topic.
Okay.
Fannie Willis. Fannie Willis is, God bless her soul, one of her best friends testified. She testified in court that she did not start having an affair with Mr. Wade until 2021. Her best friend testified that it happened in 2019. She perjured herself. Look, people are human. Let's just start there. We all have shortcomings. I have my frailties. I am a sinner. Every sinner has a past, but every saint has a past, but every sinner has a future. However, when you're in a position as the Fulton County DA, you are held to a certain standard. And there's so much at stake. I actually think the Fulton County case was the best case against Trump of all the cases that are out there. And it's not about whether she's a woman or not, because men do the same thing. But what about judgment? What about realizing what is before you? And even if you're having an affair and the wife is angry, why appoint him knowing? Have we become so arrogant and so self-absorbed that we actually think that nobody's going to find out?
Well, I think people do find out, which is what we saw in this
True.
case. Yeah, the truth will always out. And that's what we're seeing in this case, and that's what's happened in dozens of similar cases. I think relationships in the workplace are frowned upon, but I think as long as people know and there's that era of transparency and kind of goodwill, which I think was lacking in this case, I think that's the part that's more concerning to me because, I mean, especially in the conservative movement, I know couples get together all the time because working in politics specifically,
Well, look
especially
at what happened in Florida. The chairman of the Republican of the party had to resign.
Mm-hmm.
He had to step down. What about, and I think the issue is, have we grown so removed from moral clarity and moral standards that it's where we think because Trump does it, because this person does it, then there are no boundaries anymore.
I think overall, when I look at, even our heated conversation earlier, the one thing that we forget is that there is a moral decay across the board in the United States.
It's a
of
rot.
America. It's a rot. It's definitely a rot. And in fact, everything that we discuss, I put it under the umbrella of a spiritual warfare. That's not a religious connotation. I mean, when we forget that outside of this flesh, this thing that make us think, say to go to the bathroom, all these things that operate us as part of a spiritual, and that we have lost our way, and there is definitely a moral decay from the top to the bottom. Debauchery all over the place. When you talk about human trafficking, why do we allow our children, 700,000 people go missing in America, and you can't put the majority of children on the milk box the way we used to be able to do, missing, because there's so many and nobody talks about it, right? We don't talk about the increase of the homelessness in America and what people have to do who are desperate anymore, right? When we talk about churches, mega churches, where you have large congregations and your social services have shrunk that match the government, which add crisis to the community. Remember when we were locked in segregation, when I talked about Dr. King saying that he was afraid that we would integrate ourselves out of power, he was also talking about spiritual and moral power. And we do see that decay, because when we talked about parental concerns, often the parents, if they weren't in jail, especially in the years I was born, the 50s and 60s, you could depend on, it seemed like the comedian who's in prison, you know I'm talking about, Huxtable, Bill Cosby, when he talked about if something was wrong in the community, the woman who's sitting on the stoop would beat you. Then she'd tell your mother she would beat you. And then when your father got home, he would beat you. But there was a connected to community, because I'm talking about the neighbor, the mother, then the father. It was that thing in which we protect. We're not protected.
Let me interject something here. I want to make this personal.
Okay,
Look,
personal. All right.
You know, all of us have been accused of things. I've been accused of it. And I know sometimes when I read about myself on Wikipedia, they love to bring up all those things that I've been accused of, but that's okay. Yeah. But here's the thing I can honestly and proudly say. I'm not that person 5 or 10 years ago. I work hard to be a better person. I make better choices. To whom much is given, much is expected. And let me tell you something. It's a lot of work conquering your demons. It's a lot of work not giving in to temptations.
That's why why you fast and pray so much.
Listen, it's not easy, but listen, honestly, you got to work on you. Everybody's so busy working on everybody else.
But you know what, Armstrong, I look at some of your posts, and when I look at it, I see that you have been so informed by your mother, your beloved
and
mother.
And my father.
And your father,
yes.
Right? So again, you've been informed by something, so you have something to relate to put you in check.
You got to find something to put you in check.
But see, and that's why it is incumbent upon, you talk about, okay, you want to talk about the solidification of our unification under the banner as Americans. We also need that in communities too. Right, where the flag is not waving equally for us. And in our community, that's why I call upon the Black community. It is incumbent on us, right? We know that there are children whose fathers are in prison, their mothers are in prison, because we act like the women are just no longer, orange is the new black, is based off seeing more women go to prison. I'm watching 3 girls, they were 18 years old, balloons coming out of a restaurant. By the time they got to the end of the door, they were in a brawl so violent, I had to call the police on them because they were going to kill each other. It broke my heart.
But you had to call the police.
I had to call the police.
Let me wrap with you, because you're the younger generation.
Yes,
it's called personal inventory. Because the more powerful, the more you have, the more that temptation grows. And that's what people forget. You've got to make better choices. Because it's no different than people in the churches. People assume because the pastor fails, then the word of God fails. No. People are flawed. The word is still true. But men and women must work on themselves. Fannie Willis has nobody to blame but herself and Wade when it's all said and done. Not Trump, not Wade's wife, but the choices that they make. And that's what it's about. No different than these young people we talked about. In the end, it's about your accountability and responsibility. It's just like young people, what they fight with, everybody fights with something. But what are you going to decide to fight with it to make sure that you don't become another headline? And that's her reputation now. She's bright, she's competent, but this is what people are going to remember her as, an adulteress. And it's sad.
I don't think they're going to remember her as an adulteress. Too many people are adulterous.
Too many people are adulterous.
I'm saying that what they're going to remember as the person who might have jeopardized the eradication of Trump having another choice. I don't think it's going to be that. I think her historical landmine would be that situation.
Because they'll forget about this.
Right. I mean, come on. We forget.
That's the last word. Bruce Fein, Victoria, Marcia, thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the broadcast.